Thank you. Folks, I'm happy to welcome Marc Schaus to our meeting tonight. He's going to talk about his book Post-Secular, that you can get on Amazon and from humanist perspectives. And it's an ebook, so all you do is download it to your device. And I have many questions about it, and he'll probably answer them all.
Thank you. Okay. No mic tonight, so I guess at this volume, can you hear me all the way in the back there? Yeah, you can. Very good.
Okay. Can you go to the back just for lighting? Yeah.
Right about here?
Or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Or if you can go just a bit to the left, yeah, that would be good.
Like a trap door here?
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Still hear me in the back? Yeah. Very good. Okay. If you're off to the side, that's very professional. All right. Very good. P.S. Thank you, George, by the way, for offering to cover drinks tonight. Try and not run up your tab. It's very nice of you. Actually gave me kind of a revelation as a debut writer, how gracious I was for just getting this random free beer. That really made me think. I mean, the last time I went into Chapters and picked up a book and looked at the author name, I thought, God, this guy's got a book out. He must have so much money. Now I know that is probably not the case. He probably does not have all that much money. And I'm sure that when he probably drives to his book talks, I'm sure that these other writers, they probably drive there in their 2005 Pontiac Sunfire as well. I'm very sure of that. Very, very, very sure of that. But anyway, so as George was saying, my name is Marc Schaus, and I had a book just came out about a month and a half ago, start of June, called Post-Secular, Science, Humanism, and the Future of Faith. And it was released by a smaller kind of nonprofit humanist imprint out of Ottawa called Canadian Humanist Publications. And basically, if I could sum up exactly what the book is about in one sentence, I suppose I would say that it's about the growth of secularism and non-religion around the world now and into the future. So, for a group like you guys, secularism and non-religion, probably two terms you're very familiar with. I mean, secularism, much more the kind of political, social sense of it, the idea of separating church and state. So the idea that we shouldn't be deriving our laws from what we read in religious scriptures, or even on top of that, kind of the extrajudicial social codes of what kind of clothes we should wear and who we should hang out with. Not deriving those social values from religious scriptures. Non-religion, very related but still separate term, basically just the absence of traditional supernatural beliefs and your basic non-religious or religious non-affiliation. So there you'd have your atheists, your humanists, free thinkers, so on and so forth. And so basically when I started out writing this book, I really wanted to write it because it seemed to me, in my, I guess just my direct experience, that both of these value systems seem to be increasing around the world. Everywhere that I seemed to look, in international headlines, or just maybe people I knew, it seemed like I was knowing fewer and fewer very traditional, hardcore conservative believers and just seeing secular values kind of growing worldwide. And right when I started to begin my research on this, I was just embroiled in just an absolutely vicious debate with a theist on precisely these kinds of issues about whether we are or are not seeing kind of a growth of secular values. And just the vehemence with which I was met with arguments from a theist on this issue on the internet, I basically, no, you're an idiot. This is absolutely not happening. You're reading these stats and figures all wrong. It's absolutely ridiculous. What we're actually seeing is a religious revival. Short-term trends of secularism. Have you ever seen the fertility rates of Christian families and Muslims? They're going to run the world by 2050, so on and so forth. I was having this conversation where all of us have our most intellectual and sophisticated conversation on the internet with strangers. That obviously was several years ago, but just the degree of blowback that I got from the theist arguing, I really thought to myself, all right, that's enough. I'm really going to go out and find all the stats and figures that I can and come back and answer this question definitively. I'm going to go out and get all the census data and all the polling results and all of the academic papers that I can and just come back and hit caps lock and just unleash the fury of this guy. So that was many, many years ago. I've been doing exactly that ever since. And it's a significant undertaking. trying to gauge whether the world is becoming more secular, drifting towards or away from secular values. I mean, we have thousands of international headlines and hundreds of academic papers being published all throughout academia every single week. Any piece of information from any of those could possibly be directly pertinent to determining whether or not the world is maybe becoming more secular or not. So now I've done that for years, and I believe that I can now definitively say, on at least an odds and averages kind of sense, that the world is in fact drifting more towards secular values and, if not direct religious non-belief, a dilution of supernaturalism that has been in past beliefs. So when I started out doing this research, I found that some groups, I say it on odds and averages sense, because some groups around the world are becoming more secular and some groups don't seem to, where groups you have like here in North America or in Western Europe, secular values are taking on really well. Other parts of the world, like the Middle East, like Northern Africa, like Southwest Asia, not so much. I mean, or at least not as easily, or if we are seeing any gains for secular value, baby steps at a time. So I really wanted to find out at that point why. Why would some cultures be embracing secular values more readily than others? Is it a matter of the kind of faith that they have that seems to leave them more open to secular ideas, or is it a matter of their socio-cultural history, or what would lead to just that differential? And I found at that point in my research, I really didn't know a lot about what various cultures and major faiths around the world actually believe. So in terms of really getting to the definitive answer of why do we see that differential, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to go all the way back, and study spiritual ideas all throughout history and see if secular values have ever taken on anywhere. And if they have, what was the kind of belief system and what was kind of the socio-cultural history that led up to that? Now, if you were to do that, to actually go back to start spiritual ideas on earth and then start reading the spiritual scriptures of these people, the kind of mythological commentary, if you were to start at the, say, ancient Mesopotamians and Babylonians, go up through the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks and Romans, the early Hebrews, subsequent Christians, and then to the Muslims and the Buddhists and Hindus and Jains and Mormons and Scientologists. If you were to actually go and read all of their religious literature, kind of back to back, it took you a long time. It took me a long time. But if you did do that, I believe that several things would become immediately apparent to you. You would see a certain kind of set of very pervasive ideas that, despite a stunning variance of spiritual ideas on planet Earth, a very pervasive set of similar ideas in terms of the kind of core beliefs of how different cultures have imagined a reality of work, how they've imagined their gods to work, the kinds of heroes that they cherished and the kind of exploits that their heroes get into, the kind of rogues gallery of arch villains that every culture has kind of had, the ideas of heaven that they sought to get into in the hereafter, and the kinds of hell that they all sought to avoid at the same time. And perhaps even more tellingly, I also believe that were you to go back and study the entirety of the spiritual cartography on planet Earth all throughout history, perhaps even more tellingly, you would also notice that faiths always start out as one thing with a kind of core set of beliefs in a particular God, and they very rarely, if ever, stay the same thing all throughout their history until the ideas become extinct at some point in the future. Faiths always change. I mean, even right now, today, your grandfather's Christianity is not his grandfather's Christianity, which is definitely not his grandfather's Christianity. And it seemed to me, that time and again, all throughout history, that when certain social groups believe in a particular idea, that depending on social developments relative to their culture and kind of environmental triggers, predictable changes to their social organizations predicate predictable changes to their spiritual beliefs. Now, if I had to think of just one example of that, if you were to go back to, say, the antiquity of our species, in which we kind of more existed closer to smaller bands, or we had tribes or villages or even chieftains, all of the spiritual beliefs at that point in history had not really evolved to be very mature yet. They were very animistic. So the belief in more or less kind of invisible spirits inhabiting, say, the rocks or the trees or in animals or various environmental phenomena we can see, very spiritualizing of nature. You are very unlikely to find a God worshipped during that period in human history that cares about how we treat each other. You will not find a God from that point in human history that openly is against us lying, cheating, and stealing from each other. We don't have moralizing gods. That idea only really came later in terms of a variety of cultures in which we kind of reached this. We kind of reached a point of being a collective anonymous. This kind of this point of where you go into a group of people and you don't automatically recognize everyone else. So I surmise, like a lot of other people surmise, that we don't see the evolution of a moralizing God before that point in history because you know everybody else in your group, and that you can trust everybody else in your group, and even if you can't trust anybody else in your group, if they wrong you, everyone else is going to see it, and they tend to shun and ostracize and work out people with antisocial tendencies because they know that groups are stronger than people. It only seems to be when you go to a market, you maybe don't know this guy or that person over there, and you can't really trust who they are or what they're all about, and the people that live on the outskirts of town that you haven't seen for 5 years. Only then does it seem like a compelling idea to human beings that we should have some kind of transcendental policeman figure who is doling out spiritual rewards and punishments for antisocial behavior. Or perhaps, even if I could recommend just one book tonight other than my own, it would be journalist Robert Wright's Pulitzer Prize finalist, The Evolution of God, in which he kind of basically talks about exactly what I'm talking about here, the predictable social changes that happen to believers right there on the ground and change the kind of beliefs that they believe in predictable ways. And in his book, he talks more specifically about the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, where if you were to take, say, the average Christian Bible or the average Muslim Quran and kind of unscramble the books, the chapters that we get it in naturally, picking it up any day today, and then put the chapters into the date they were historically dated to have been written in. God always, in all three monotheistic faiths, starts out as a particular kind of figure. He always starts out as the kind of guy that's saying, guys, everybody's equal. Oh, you rich guy and you poor guy, everybody's going to be judged the same. We're all the same in the eyes of God. Very popular idea with poor people, that idea right there. And usually, books of the Bible where God becomes a little more intolerant usually happen historically when church leaders have amassed kind of enough followers to command an army. And all of a sudden, when those books are written, all of a sudden God finds a reason. You can't trust those guys, or those guys are no good. That's heresy over there. And then usually, as soon as all these other surrounding tribes are vanquished and their resources are stolen, usually you see God kind of morph back into that more loving, God, why are you fighting? We got to get along here. Come on. We surmise that because church leaders have like an empire to run at that point, they really want everybody to get along. But that says to us that people are reacting to social changes in predictable ways in all three of those cases, and in other cases around the globe. So in terms of conducting the research for this book, at that point I basically stopped dead and thought, okay, why? Why would that be? How is that possible? How could the content of beliefs in terms of similarities in, say, the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incas, why should they have anything to do with cultures that they had no cultural crosstalk with? And why would people across vast distances of time and geographical space react to the same kinds of stimuli, the same kinds of reactions in their beliefs? Now, George didn't really get a chance to introduce much of my academic background. So my academic background is in neuroscience. So the study of human brain, neurochemicals, neuroanatomy, and basically how biology corresponds to changes in human behavior, even complex human behaviors like spiritual beliefs. So I thought, okay, these people all must have had something in common to react the same kind of way and to act the same kind of general way. And what cultures all throughout history have had in common is their genetics, is the presence of the same relative human brain. Same kind of human brain dating even back to our last common ancestor for all of human beings genetically, very small differences between them and us now, and even between races now, infinitesimally small genetic differences. We all have the same kind of basic brain that we have unwittingly been given. And this brain that we have, whether we like it or not, has been forged and tempered through millions and millions of years of evolutionary fitness, dating back even before the evolution of our species, dating back to non-human primates, and even before that. We come from a long line of particular behaviors designed to survive in particular environments. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to study how the brain has evolved to produce these kinds of behaviors, better start ingratiating myself in some of the literature. There were other cognitive scientists who are writing about basically the same thing. And we now have an absolute library, I'm happy to say, of other cognitive scientists who are researching the exact same thing, who are saying that if we want to understand why the brain is doing what it does, we better understand where it comes from. And if I could pump up even a third book tonight, it would probably be anthropologist Pascal Boyer's Religion Explained, in which he kind of talks about when we look at the development of the human brain, we have spent the longest in terms of the amount of time static in one environment in hunter-gatherer societies. Earlier on, he posits during the Pleistocene epoch. Some researchers go a little bit further back, some researchers go a little bit more towards the present, but either way, a lot of cognitive scientists agree that the brain has spent most of its time developing towards now in times relived in more or less simpler hunter-gatherer societies. Now, the kinds of challenges that the brain needed to come up with solutions for, wanted to adapt and survive, the kinds of challenges during that point in history, very different from the challenges that we have right now today. So I mean, pioneering human beings had to survive and thrive in harsh and unforgiving environments. They had to constantly be on the lookout for potential signs of any kind of danger, any kind of potential reward anywhere out there in physical space. They had to be able to spot potential eyes looking back at us, to be able to sense whether something is alive and could mean us danger. And we've evolved, we've found, an ability to kind of overascribe patterns that may be meaningful in nature as a direct result. So I mean, back in that time period, you definitely couldn't trust a lot of people outside of your social in-group. The people who you knew and were around all the time. Could not trust literally any other people that you saw who might want to harm you or take any of your resources or compete with you for what were then admittedly very limited resources. So people know, obviously, that a group is stronger than another random person. So we needed to face the challenge of being able to coexist in small bands of people who we knew very well and established emotional connections with. We needed to be able to form close-knit friendships, to be able to hunt together and survive together. We needed to be able to find and romance partners. All of these kinds of things are leaving evolutionary remnants in the brain even today. Where for anybody who's seen the Cosmos series of Neil deGrasse Tyson, the sliver in which post-industrial society in which we currently live on a 12-hour clock takes up, what, like the last 15 seconds or something like that? Now, we are not quite, as anthropologist Scott Atran once quipped, Stone Age minds living in the space age. But the reality, sadly, is not that far off. So in terms of understanding what the brain is actually set up to do, Boyer's Religion Explained, and basically the whole lineup of literature ever since then has been looking at the mental tools the brain can use to overascribe patterns in nature, something that writer Michael Sherber, also a pro-secular writer, called patternicity. The ability to overascribe potential meaning between maybe benign environmental events, where if you misattributed a false positive, that could be dangerous. If you don't recognize something when it's meaningful, that could be dangerous. Or if you do recognize it and it's advantageous, that could be very well for your survival. And a false negative doesn't really impact your social fitness at all. So you kind of evolve these abilities to overascribe both agency and purpose kind of in nature. And when we line up those mental tools that the brain comes pre-equipped with to the earliest beliefs of our species, we come very close to discerning where early animistic kinds of beliefs came from. Right, so I mean, that tells me that if we're looking for mental tools biologically in the brain that may be kind of predisposing people to come up with the same kinds of ideas, so on and so forth, all throughout history. That tells us a lot about how spiritual ideas actually work in the human brain. So, I mean, if we're believing that we may be predisposed to agree with certain ideas, we're agreeing that a lot of these things from the environment happen at a pre-conscious level. So, in neuroscience, we break down any given moment. There is a lot of processing, subconscious, below the level of consciousness processing. The brain is doing literally every second. So, I mean, even in this moment, right now, moment to moment, photons are bouncing around the room, hitting your retinas, being transduced in an electrochemical signal, being sent to the brain and analyzed for signs of form and function and context. And then kind of combined with other sensory modalities, maybe sound waves bouncing off the walls and hitting your eardrums, and again being transduced in an electrochemical signal, and then combined for you to be able to tell exactly where I'm standing and what I'm talking about. But before you can even have a chance to have the conscious perception that I'm standing here and talking to you, a stunning amount of processing has already gone on in the brain in which it's looking for particular patterns. And this makes sense. If we believe that we've evolved from previous, less conscious animals, it would make sense that less of a conscious awareness goes into the processing before we get the human level of awareness thereafter. And the brain is very much looking for patterns of danger coming up in these early patterns. And the brain comes with an emergency cutoff system, very fortunately for us, because the brain really wants you to survive if it detects any sign of early dangers in these patterns that are constantly bombarding our senses. Now, the example that I like to give is usually the hand on the hot stove example, in which you accidentally put your hand on a hot stove, because everybody does that, and you don't stand there rationalizing, God, this is stupid, this is brutal, I should take my hand off immediately. You kind of jerk your hand back immediately out of instinct. The brain kicks in before you can even really get that conscious perception to save you. Already, untold things are happening inside of your body. Your eyes are dilated just a little bit. Your heart is pumping more blood, readying you for signs that you may need to be in a situation where you need to fight or run away. This can happen with the perception of particular ideas as well. We find that patterns in the environment, which are typical of evolutionary predators, the brain perceives more readily than benign patterns. So even down as far as infancy, if you were to show an infant, say, like a pattern of a snake or something like that in a picture of a giraffe, they are much more readily to respond physiologically to the presence of the snake. Now, why would that be? I mean, last time I checked, which was last year when I was doing the research for this book, snakes, still pretty much the #1 fear on Earth, culture to culture. For some reason, people just seem to have this unnatural fear of snakes. And that's not very rational, especially for people like us who live in an environment where snakes are not all that prevalent, or if they do, I mean, if one was right here, I mean, I'm sure I could take it if it really came down to it, but I mean, there's still kind of a deep-seated emotional negative association. That doesn't make a lot of sense if we're thinking about it as a rational association. It is not a rational association in terms of even infants showcasing the same kind of negative association. These precede conscious awareness. So when we apply that to the kinds of similar icons that I keep finding coming up more or less very often throughout the history of spiritual ideas on Earth, we find a rich history of evolutionary iconography within the similarities of our spiritual ideas. So if we were to take a mythology textbook and flip it open to a random page, odds are pretty decent in terms of the entire lexicon of spiritual ideas encased in there. You're probably going to find a mention of a snake in some way, somehow. And then of all of those particular mentions, they're probably going to be negative. Not all the time. Some cultures just reviewed them. But I mean, you're very much more likely often than not to find an evil serpent demon that really wants to do us all harm, and usually is some kind of key figurehead devil creature. Why would that be? I mean, for someone like me who grew up in what is basically white picket suburbia, why would that make any sense? So if we're looking at how the brain has been set up to function, and the kinds of beliefs that seem to become, at least statistically, more likely thereafter, that again says to me that faith is not often based on the highly elaborate, rationalized kind of rationales that believers would often like us to believe that they are based on. And for anybody who's actually debated with a firm theist who's really convinced of their faith, that maybe seems like the least necessary realization in the history of realizations. But it says to me why some people in particular seem more or less immune to a barrage of highly intellectualized, highly rationalized ideas, because that doesn't resonate where faith actually seems to lie subconsciously in the emotional attachment to particular rigid evolutionary iconography. So, I mean, we can say that about people who have faith in typical supernatural ideas. We can also say that about ourselves. We have faith in our own ideas right now as humanists. So, I mean, I could go to a firm, committed religious believer and say, hey, I got this book, and these physics theories say that your God is pretty unlikely. So I've got all these equations here, you should look at these. That's probably not going to fly because it's a very abstract, very analytical methodology of trying to talk to somebody, not directing faith where it actually lies. Likewise, if I were to come in here and say, guys, I've got all these physics theories, basically proves a God. Sorry, the jig is up, we're all wrong. Here's why. It's probably not going to fly because, again, that's not really where convictions kind of lie. And we have a great amount of fascinating research going on about basically the cognitive science of religious disbelief going on right here in Canada. Over on the West Coast, over in UBC, Dr. Aranoran Zayan right now is conducting some research about the kinds of conditions that seem to lead people to give up their religious convictions more easily. What kinds of contexts for them to hear a rationalized argument like evolutionary biology, like 21st century cosmology, what kinds of environments seem to make them thereafter less likely to evince kind of feelings that they're committed to their faith or not. So we have a veritable science of atheism going on right now. And what they're also finding, very curiously, also very related, is that spiritual beliefs not only seem to work on this kind of subconscious threshold, moral feelings also happen to work on this level. Or even if I kind of rationalize intellectually something that you feel is immoral, it's probably not going to fly, at least not right away. If I was to come in here and say, guys, I've got some fancy data charts and some fancy figures about how stealing from people is the best. It's just the absolute best, and these pieces of data might have a fancy pie graph or something. It's probably still not going to fly because you don't feel that. You're going to say, no, Schaus, here, you're manipulating the data. You've probably got an agenda. You just want to see people steal from each other or something. Because that's not really where that kind of pre-conscious rationale lies. Now, kind of moving it along toward... Stop it.